It is time for the slaves of Earth to recognize their masters. Seal off the city.
Oh yeah, I've seen this one. That's the one where Spock goes nuts. The Michael Bay directed Transformers movies have a more or less set in stone reputation, that being that they're shallow, incoherent, annoying, offensive, immature, poorly acted, overly long explosion fests that represent everything that people hate about Bay as a filmmaker. I am directly below the enemy scrotum and all that jazz.
This looks like a cool place to kick it.
No, not that jazz. The only film that somewhat manages to avoid that status is the first one, and even then there are plenty of people that don't like it. Me personally, I like the first movie fine enough, but I really only think it's decent, and there are plenty of other movies like it that I would rather watch, like, off the top of my head, The Avengers. So, with that in mind, I'm gonna buck the trend and say that my personal favorite in the series is actually the third movie, Dark of the Moon. Compared to the first movie, the action scenes are way more creative, and the lengths they went to create some of these sequences are really ambitious and are pretty incredible at points. And it arguably has the most in-depth story of all the movies, for what that's worth for this franchise.
Oh God, I'm sozzled.
There's a decent amount of lore and history to make the plot feel big and epic. It really feels like the odds are stacked against the heroes more than ever, and the conflict even includes some occasionally decent emotional tension. Again, by the standards of this franchise. But nowhere is that semi-complexity more evident than with the main villain of the movie, the Autobot leader turned Decepticon collaborator, Sentinel Prime. Don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna act like he's one of the deepest villains ever, or like the rift between him and Optimus Prime is Prince of Egypt level emotional, but compared to the other villains in this franchise, his role in the story is made of comparatively sterner stuff. Throughout the movies, Megatron and the other Decepticons have always been pretty cartoonishly evil with not a lot of nuance, which I suppose makes sense given the source material.
You destroy everything you touch, Megatron.
Because everything I touch is food for my hunger for power!
But it doesn't really make for much entertainment value beyond just watching wrestling matches between the cool robots. And don't get me started on the Fallen. You know, the villain whose name was in the title of the movie but only had about 5 minutes of screen time. Go ahead. Go into the comments below and write one line of dialogue that you remember from The Fallen. I dare you. And if you actually do, I'm just gonna assume you looked it up, because I like to assume the worst in people. But let's look at Sentinel and see what he has to offer, starting with the opening scene. We learn that in the last days of the Transformers' home planet of Cybertron, a single Autobot ship escaped the planet with a mysterious cargo that could have ended the war against the Decepticons. The ship crash-landed on Earth's moon, where humans eventually discovered its cargo as well as its captain.
Who was its captain?
The great Sentinel Prime. He was commander of the Autobots before me.
Throughout the first act of the movie, we learn just how important Sentinel is to the universe and the characters. The Transformers War has already brought one planet to total destruction and could potentially claim Earth as well. It's a big deal that Sentinel apparently holds the key to potentially ending it for good and making Cybertron inhabitable again. And learning that he was Optimus's mentor tells us a lot about him. Throughout the movies, Optimus has generally been depicted as a determined and courageous leader, someone who will act as a voice of inspiration for his friends and teammates and will even sacrifice his own life to protect another person.
Sam, run.
So we can assume that someone who taught Optimus everything he knows would be just as compassionate and wise as him, maybe even more so. Let's just hope he didn't also teach Optimus to slice off an opponent's face as a trophy.
Give me your face.
Anyway, mutilation aside, once the Autobots find and revive Sentinel, they reunite and learn that the cargo Sentinel was carrying was a teleportation device.
For resources, for refugees.
Refugees or troops of soldiers, weapons, maybe bombs.
The Decepticons must never know the space bridge is here, for in their hands, it would mean the end of your world.
They agree to work together to keep the device safe, and Optimus and Sentinel take some time to get reacquainted. And throughout this point in the movie, we get some hints about Sentinel as a character. He's portrayed as this experienced and authoritative warrior who has dedicated so much energy to protecting both his planet and the people he loves. And his interactions with Optimus show that they have a long history and a mutual respect for each other.
I've wondered what might have been if you had fought the final battle instead of me. Thanks to you, our race survives.
Although, bear in mind that I said that the movie hints about Sentinel as a character, not that it fully delivers. While it is nice that we get to see some camaraderie between Optimus and Sentinel, it does feel a little rushed and not as fleshed out as it could have been. Take a look at this scene, for example, where Sentinel is initially revived by Optimus.
It is all right. You are safe.
You would think that there would be a big emotional moment where Sentinel is relieved to see that his protege and team are still alive, and some happiness from the Autobots to have their leader back from the dead. Then maybe some grief from Sentinel as he realizes that his home planet was destroyed, followed by some reassurance from the Autobots as they introduce him to their new world. Instead, all of that is just sped through in a couple of lines as Sentinel barely gets a chance to have any kind of reaction, and then the rest of the scene is just exposition.
Excuse me, gentlemen. What is this technology you're looking for? You're talking about a teleportation device, aren't you? A means of an instant strike. That's its military function, isn't it?
Even the scene where Optimus and Sentinel reflect on their past doesn't emphasize their friendship as much as it could. Even though it's implied that Sentinel taught Optimus everything he knows, there isn't much evidence from the way he acts that suggests that's the case. They just kind of say he was a great leader and expect you to take their word for it. Towards the end of the scene, this exchange happens.
It is your right to lead us again. I am no longer your teacher, Optimus. You are mine.
It's a somewhat touching moment, but it's a little held back by the fact that it just ends there. There's no response or reaction from Optimus as he realizes that he's surpassed his teacher that he looked up to for so long, and that very same teacher is now looking to him for advice. It's a decent scene, but it could have been a lot more than that, and it would have helped to have made Sentinel's eventual betrayal of the Autobots have much more of an emotional impact. Oh, sorry, did I say eventual betrayal? What I meant to say was betrayal that comes right the fuck out of nowhere and goes from 0 to 100 in the span of a few seconds. Later on in the movie, there's a chase scene on a highway as the Decepticons are chasing down the Autobots to get to Sentinel. The Autobots briefly escape, and Sentinel just arbitrarily decides now is the time to reveal his plan and kills off Ironhide.
A deal had to be made with Megatron.
Not only does the timing just seem chosen at random, but from what we've seen of his character so far, such an extreme turn doesn't feel earned or built up to at all. His plan is to use the teleporter to transport Cybertron to Earth's atmosphere and use Earth's resources and the human race to make Cybertron inhabitable again. But for someone who fought alongside the Autobots and had a great deal of appreciation for them, you would think blasting one of them to heaven, as depicted here, would be something that he'd only do in an if all else fails scenario. Here's an idea. We take that scene from earlier where Optimus and Sentinel reminisce, and at the end of their talk, Sentinel confides in Optimus that he made an arrangement with the Decepticons. He explains what they plan to do and tries to convince Optimus and the other Autobots to join them. That then leads to an argument where Optimus is horrified at what his role model is proposing and tries to talk him out of it while Sentinel desperately tries to keep his longtime friends on his side. You know, something like, what war destroyed we can rebuild, but only if we join with the Decepticons. No, it's not the only way. This is our home. Boy, I can't wait to see that part, Double D. Yes, well, let's not and say we did, Ed. It just seems strange that he would so readily kill off the friends that he's trying to protect without at least attempting to reason with them. Also, the death of Ironhide might have been a little more shocking if his character had been anything more than just a glorified extra throughout these movies. Really, it feels more like they just killed off Ironhide because he's easily replaceable. They could have just as easily killed off Mr. Howard from iCarly over here and it would have been just as emotionally effective.
A total of 35 people knew the real plan at NASA.
And I hate laughter.
I thought you hated your wife.
Her too.
But anyway, a few scenes later, Sentinel starts enacting his plan with the Decepticons, and we get a confrontation between him and Optimus.
What war destroyed, we can rebuild, but only if we join with the Decepticons. No, it's not the only way. This is our home.
Wait a second, now all of a sudden you're willing to talk this out? Where was this conversation before you shot Ironhide? Then the scene just ends with Sentinel just walking away.
You're lucky I didn't kill you.
And again, kind of strange timing to be showing mercy after what you did before this. Come come to think of it, why did he suggest that Optimus become his teacher in that earlier scene if he was still planning to call the shots? All that means is that arguably the most emotionally resonant moment between these two is completely meaningless and makes no sense in the overall plot. The conflict eventually culminates in a big final battle involving Sentinel and the Decepticons trying to bring Cybertron to Earth, enslaving mankind, and Optimus and the Autobots coming to stop him. And to add one last piece of confusion to Sentinel's characterization, we get this line.
I bring you Cybertron, and still you choose humanity.
You were the one who taught me freedom is everyone's right.
But if that's the case, then why does Sentinel seemingly show no empathy towards the humans and what he's doing to them? Even if he's compromised his principles for what he thinks is the greater good, you'd think he'd at least be a little upset about it if freedom is what he claims to believe in. The only time he shows any remorse for what he's doing is in this line right here.
Stop! No, 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 Sentinel!
Forgive me.
I'm not kidding. A 2.5-hour movie and Sentinel's internal conflict is conveyed in 2 words. Aside from that, the closest thing we get to rationalization on his part is when he says,
You simply fail to understand that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
And yeah, I get it, because he's voiced by Leonard Nimoy, so Star Trek, I guess. But in terms of the actual story, this line doesn't make any sense. There are billions of humans on Earth. Nothing in these movies have ever suggested that there are billions of Transformers. Maybe a few hundred if I want to give a generous estimation. You know, Michael, just because you can make pop culture references, that doesn't necessarily mean you should.
I'm just trying to help out.
The battle ultimately ends with a big one-on-one showdown with Optimus coming out on top and killing Sentinel.
No, Optimus!
And you'd think that Optimus taking the life of the person that taught him every value he has would probably be quite a difficult moment for him to process and might qualify for some reflection. But instead, all we get out of him is like a 20-second long monologue, and the epilogue in its entirety lasts about a minute.
There will be days when we lose faith, but the day will never come that we forsake this planet.
That's literally it. Even the Autobots can't get through this scene without cracking a few jokes.
I love you.
I love you. So, like I said, I can't pretend that Sentinel Prime is a particularly well-written villain. He's way too inconsistent for me to say that in good conscience, but I will acknowledge that there was at least an attempt to make a compelling conflict here. Not an amazingly strong attempt, but it's still an improvement from the other movies, and I'd argue that it does help to add a little bit of weight to the story. There are times where Optimus and Sentinel's friendship does feel genuine, and when you get to this final battle where they have to fight each other to a brutal death, it is a little more impactful when you know that neither of them wanted it to come to this, and even during the battle, they still occasionally try to appeal to each other.
Please!
Personally, I'll take that over a fight against Megatron or the Fallen any day. It's not much, but I'll take what I can get. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, then consider supporting me on Patreon, where you'll get to see perks like your name present at the end of videos and early releases of future videos. Mojo, I love you.